Hello, I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today, we're talking about attention deficit disorder, ADD, with Dr. Donald Gilbert, a board-certified trauma specialist, trained in critical incident stress management, and a former ordained pastor. So quite a skill set brings to us today. With the increase in ADD diagnoses, we realize that we are generally a very underinformed culture when it comes to ADD. We've invited Dr. Gilbert, back here to the show to share some more of his views and insights that can help us better understand attention deficit disorder. Dr. Don, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you, Peter. I'm just shuffling papers here. Sorry about that. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on again. We're excited about talking about something that's really important to me and personally has an impact on my life as well as many others that I deal with.
Well, when I listened to you talk about it a little bit last time, I realized that it impacts a lot of lives, but I didn't realize many of the impacts until I've listened to you speak. You have a personal journey that led you to sort of a aha moment about it. You want to share that with us?
Yeah, it's a long story made short. I was doing my dissertation and doing research into my dissertation and began to run across this idea of ADD, ADHD, and what is it? And of course, back when you and I were in school, these kinds of things were not really that relevant in terms of diagnoses or even what it was or what it wasn't. And so in that process, I ran across some information, read a book or two, and began to recognize that maybe I had ADD. And I decided that I would dive a little bit deeper into that. Got turned on to Dr. Daniel Amen, who has done research over the past 15, 20 years on ADD, ADHD, depression, anxiety, and the brain. And so I got certified, and I've been using some of his certification materials. And it's just been interesting as he has continued to do research in the last 5 years to really see in depth how the brain is functioning, how it dysfunctions, if you will, due to ADD, ADHD. So that's kind of been the journey. I discovered in that process that when I was in grade school, I didn't do very well because I had ADD and didn't know it. And that's certainly been impactful in my journey.
In talking to people now, it's a whole different world. People are now more comfortable, if I could say more comfortable, talking about mental health and even ADD, but looking in the mirror like you did, and you made me look in the mirror too. I started realizing that, boy, either that definition is really loose or there are a lot of people that have ADD. Where are we here on this? Is it really as widespread as we're hearing?
Well, I think there's a lot of misdiagnoses out there. There's a lot of differences between ADD, ADHD, and people on the spectrum, such as, well, they don't even have Asperger's now on the new DSM-5 TR, but when you start looking at autism, and so we look at a whole plethora, continuum of symptomologies, and you have to have certain cluster symptoms to have certain diagnoses. Most people don't understand that. I'm not even sure I completely understand it because I didn't get to write the DSM, which is the diagnostic manual for all the codes that we use for insurance. But as we look at that, I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one, I think as we have more and more people who have gone undiagnosed and they have children who go undiagnosed, that when it goes undiagnosed, there's a lot more symptomology that tends to take place over a period of what I call generations. And I think we're seeing that kind of catching up into our culture. I think there's also a recognition on psychiatrists as well as, I think, mental health counselors in particular, and addictions counselors, where ADD, ADHD really hits home and really begins to impact people's lives. And I think because of that, we're seeing more and more attention paid to it. I'm not really sure that there's necessarily more people who have it. I'm thinking that it's more we're more aware, and therefore we're paying more attention to those diagnoses.
I remember making a comment to you about the old axiom that a messy desk is a sign of a fertile mind, and you said not necessarily. Is there a correlation between those messes we breed around us and ADD?
Yeah, one of the symptomologies, well, actually, there's three symptomologies that have to be in existence in a person's life, but one of them is disorganization. And disorganization can show up externally, or it can also show up internally in terms of how a person is able to organize their thoughts in their brain. So when we talk about disorganization, you can look at my office or certain parts of my home, and it's all in order. On the other hand, the space that I work on a daily basis, which I call my desk, is piled with piles of paper. And so that's really the sign of my disorganization. I think the other two aspects of that is the ability to focus and concentrate for long periods of time on a single subject, particularly if you're not interested in it. And the other is the easily distracted. If you get bored, your brain's looking for stimulation.
We're going to take a short break and come down back to that, because really I feel like you're defining a large spectrum of potentials for people. So we'll come back, continue our conversation with Dr. Don Gilbert. See you all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
The black truck? Hey, Christina from accounting.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, I used to date a girl named Christina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then she dumped me for my best friend. You want to see some photos of them that I took?
I don't.
I thought we talked about this, buddy.
Buzzed and overshared again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna call a car.
That's a smart idea.
So yeah, I know, that's why I did it.
Hey, you're gonna get back to the top of the mountain.
Does that mean I'm gonna get back with Christina?
No.
Oh.
No.
Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Don Gilbert about ADD and its sort of mysterious presence in people's lives, and that some very high functioning adults as well as teens may not realize how it affects their lives. Don, you were saying three factors: disorganized, focus, and concentration, and distractibility. Does that not define what most parents think about their teenage kids nowadays?
For sure. Our screen time has generated a lot of distractibility. So when you start talking about distractibility, you can have distractibility for a variety of different reasons. Even adults can, right? Typically, people who are bored are going to find it more easily to be distracted by different things. The difference is if you're ADD or ADHD, you are almost compulsively distracted. It's not like you can control that. It's like you're bored, your brain, your eyes are looking for anything to stimulate your brain. So it's really about the functionality of the distractibility. Can you manage it? Can you not manage it? And how difficult it is for you to manage it. If people are bored, they're not going to be able to focus and concentrate long periods of time on anything. And so, but again, some people can do that for long periods of time by choice, and others find it almost impossible. So it really gets down to dysfunctionality and how much control does one have. Teenagers, they don't really have control. Their brains haven't been fully developed. And so that's why we have to do testing. That's why we have to look at all kinds of different variables to make sure that we are not basically giving somebody a label that isn't necessarily true. And so it does take some effort and some professional ability to really look at the whole life and the functionality of the adolescent or the child or the adult.
I've often heard parents say, they can't get them to concentrate in their homework. They don't read a book, but they can sit and play video games for hours and hours and stay totally focused. What's the difference between those environments? Is it because they choose it, or is it because video games have this attraction to people?
Oh, it's colorful. It's powerful. It's typically 4D or 5D. It's vision. It changes all the time. So it's really just about the fact that as kids or teenagers, we're just enthralled with those kinds of things, right? And so that's really what it's really more about. I mean, who wants to read a book versus, I don't know, watch a movie that has, every 3 seconds there's some explosion or some fantastic let's say, computer stuff that people look at and say, oh man, that's just visually stimulating, right? So they're stimulating the neurons of their brain.
Now, if somebody is diagnosed as ADD, let's say, wouldn't they also lose interest in a video game? Or do you think that can overcome that?
Yeah, the video games are so overstimulating that it can overcome that. Although
overcome.
there are some people who are really hyperactive that can't sit still long enough to actually play the game. If they can't win, then they'll stop playing it.
So let's get down into this a little bit. What are the differences between ADD, ADHD, and other things that are similar? And how would maybe a parent, either introspectively or looking at their teens, be able to start recognizing if this is something a little counseling would help with?
Well, there's a variety of symptomology, and that's what we look at. We look at what are the dysfunctionality or the functionality in what's struggling. It could be spelling. I was a terrible speller. I couldn't memorize my words. I couldn't write very well. So there's a fine motor skill that can be one symptom. Very good at math. I know some people who are ADD, ADHD that are terrible at math. So there's so many different variables. It has to be about how many symptoms and are they certain clusters of symptoms? Because you could have dyslexia, you could have hyperlexia, you could be autistic. So there are a variety of different kinds of symptomologies. It's not so easy. But if you're finding your kids not liking to read or not spell, or they get words or let's say symbols or letters or even numbers where they get them backwards, that would be a sign that they probably have something like dyslexia or could be ADHD or ADD because they're not able to remember them. So it has to do with the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain. It has to do with your processors, which is your temporal lobes, and how that all works. And when people have a lot of anxiety, then their midbrain gets into the place. So if you have heightened anxiety or intense emotions, that can shut off your prefrontal cortex and cause you not to remember things. And oh, by the way, a 15-year-old's brain is 10 years from being fully developed. So they're still adding new brain cells and they're still physiologically growing. So the new brain cells aren't connected to the old brain cells until you stimulate them and use them. And that's also part of why a teenager can have problems with these. That's why we want to look at the functionality of their whole life and try to figure out what the symptoms are. It really is something that only a professional can really, who's been trained, that can really diagnose this.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to take a short break and we're going to ask you to talk about a little bit about interventions and the idea of stigma, how it affects us and how it may even paralyze our efforts to help and heal. See you all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
Multiple studies have shown that marijuana can slow both driver reaction and response time, which can be really dangerous. He's here. He's here.
Wait. What?
I can't drive.
Why? My. Oh.
Not all internet is priced this good. Switch to Extreme and go super fast for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Oh yeah, hook up your home with powerful Wi-Fi, 99.99% reliability, and speeds that are FCC proven to be faster than advertised. Not all internet is priced this good. Switch today and get speeds starting at 100 meg for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Call 844-EXTREME2 for details.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking with Dr. Gilbert, who in addition to mental health counseling is passionate about helping people cope with attention deficit disorder. And interestingly enough, if you have a disorder, doctor, how debilitating is that to other aspects of your health?
Well, it depends. We look at it as, is it mild, is it moderate, or is it severe? If it's severe, then it can affect learning, it can affect relationships. It doesn't necessarily create health issues unless, of course, you are not really taking care of yourself in a more holistic fashion, it doesn't create diabetes or heart disease by itself. Eating badly would, not getting exercise. People who have ADD or ADHD, exercise is really an important aspect. We say there's 3 things you need to do: get really good sleep, eat a really good diet, and make sure you get exercise. Those 3 things will help you in any way, shape, or form, no matter what you are struggling with. But it's certainly with ADD and ADHD is really important, so it doesn't affect your health side of it. It can affect your relationships, and it can affect your education.
So now we're looking at, a lot of people are willing to admit that maybe they're a little bit off, and they'll think about it. I might be depressed. I'm a little bit down. I'm feeling anxious, and then they'll find a cause. Oh, it might be a test that's coming up, or a problem at work that's coming up. And then they might choose to self-medicate with any number of dangerous substances. But in the beginning, when somebody feels a little off, there's a huge amount of stigma about going to a health professional and seeing someone for counseling related to the issues. And counseling shouldn't be an admission of any kind of shame or guilt. Is this a big problem for people?
Well, I think what I like about this new generation is that there's less of a stigma in the younger generation. In my generation, it's a huge stigma. Sometimes the parents have a stigma where the child may not. And of course, as you know, sometimes children take on the stigmas of the parents because it's their parents and that's what they hear and it's what they know. I tell people that it's not any different than, let's say, having diabetes as a family issue. ADD is genetically it passes from generation to generation. So it's, in that sense, it's not any different. It's just a way the body is processing information in the brain, which is when you see diabetes, your body's not processing insulin correctly. And so this is really a processing disorder, like most other things are, even if it's a physical thing. So we try to normalize it. We try to help people understand this doesn't make your child dumb. Actually, most people who have ADD or ADHD are more likely to be higher on the IQ. And so it really is not a stigma. I have 12 grandkids. I've got 2 children, 2 grandsons that are autistic, severely autistic, but they are incredibly intelligent young men. They struggle with social skills. They struggle with certain kinds of learning. But I've got a 5th grader that was in pre-algebra, 2 or 3 years in advance in mathematics. And so it really depends upon the functionality. So we look at that and say, well, in this case, they may have autism, but there's a really positive thing about their autism in that they are highly intelligent when it comes to mathematician and mathematics. I think one could be anything he wants as long as it's math. And so it really gives you a place where you have to understand that there are some positive things about being ADD. I have some real positive things when I look at my ADD, and then there are some things that I've had to learn to get around. So there is stigma there, but I think part of counseling, as you know, is we try to, in some way, in positive psychology, we try to help people understand that there are some positives about that really helps them to begin to understand and be able to look at themselves and say, I'm unique. God may be unique, and that's not bad. ADD is not a bad thing. It's not a condemnation, if you will. It can actually be positive, but sometimes you have to get people to actually see it in a positive way.
So if somebody feels off and feels wrong and they don't get any guidance, the problem could manifest itself negatively. I mean, it's better to be aware of something.
Absolutely.
So, you've worked with a lot of patients. What have been like, if you were to just tell us some sort of testimonials without anybody's name or information, what have you seen people as they go through a process of counseling acknowledge as becoming more self-aware or feeling better?
Well, I have grandchildren, and most of them have some particular issue since grandpa has ADD, right? So there's a genetic predisposed that's 12 grandkids. So we have conversations about that around the table. I get to share my understanding of ADD, but I think as they begin to understand, then they begin to say, oh, well, there's something positive about that. for instance, someone might early on in their life say, oh, I just struggle with learning. I struggle with this. I struggle with that. They might come up with the idea in their own brain that, oh, I'm stupid because I don't find it as easy as, my friend Joe over here who gets straight A's and doesn't seem to have to struggle with anything. And so you begin to have those kinds of things that are natural for us, right? So someone might think, well, I'm stupid, or I'm not very good at this. Well, it's helping them understand they may not be very, very good at one thing, but they may not realize they have another way of learning that is unique to who they are, that it allows them to open up a whole new way of looking at themselves. And so those are some things that we try to talk about when we sit down with parents and particularly adolescents.
Wow, that's fascinating. We're going to take a short break and we're going to ask Dr. Gilbert to share some final comments, insights, and inspiration, things you don't want to miss that can help you and your family enjoy a better life. See you all after the break.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At Mediacom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared. And you can be certain we'll keep your world connected.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Peter Komendowski. And today on Surviving Bad, we're talking about attention, specifically ADD, and the issues surrounding the increased awareness of the prevalence of ADD in people's lives. Let's see what insights, advice, and inspiration Dr. Gilbert has to share. Welcome back.
Thank you, Peter. I know we've talked about a variety of things today in this segment. I think one of the things I would like to encourage people, you don't have to know everything there is to know about it to be able to have a conversation. I think just starting to have a conversation with your children or even with your spouse, for instance. I have ADD. My spouse, we've been married 46 years. She's had to live with 46 years of my ADDness. So having conversations is a really important place to start. And then recognizing that if you don't have a lot of information, to go seek information. Now, obviously, when you seek information, don't just go out to the internet and just seek anything. You've got to really sit down and say, okay, what are the sites that are based on professional information and more scientifically accurate information? And so that's what I would encourage you. Certain people can call my office and talk to me if they want, but there are plenty of people who have understanding of this. It's just a growing issue I think all of us are working on. But I just encourage people, just start talking.
You talked about generational differences between like my generation, young generations. What about kids and teens that are watching this? Should they be encouraged to bring a conversation up with their parents? I mean, they might walk into some serious walls of stigma if they do that.
Yes. I would certainly encourage them to bring it up with their parents. They can certainly talk to counselors at school. They can certainly talk to teachers. If they go to church and have a pastor or priest, that would be another place. Anywhere that they feel like that there is a safe place, even talking to their doctor, for instance, saying, hey, here's some thoughts I'm having. Here's some issues I'm struggling with. But having a conversation, that's where it all starts. Sleep is really important. Children need, at least 8 hours or more of sleep. Adolescents probably 10 have their growing pains, right? Exercise is really important because for anybody, it really it changes the whole internal aspect and it resets the chemistry of our body and brain. It's really important that we get good exercise. It doesn't have to be, like I tell people, you don't have to be a weightlifter or train for a marathon. Just get your body running so that your blood is flowing faster. It really washes out your vessels and helps reset your chemistry. And of course, what you eat. As ADD, red dye is not good for my brain. There's something about whatever it is in red dyes in food. My brain just kind of shuts down. It's not good. I don't know if there's an allergic reaction or what there is, but we talk about that. We talk about diet. We have a dietitian on staff that we sit down with families and talk about how their diet. So we look at exercise, sleep, and diet. We look at functionality. We look at classroom work. We look at helping kids figure out how to do some workarounds of some of the things. We do all those kinds of things. We even talk about supplements that might be good before we ever talk about medication. But we look at the whole person and we look at the whole family, and we try to just help them to make some steps. It's not hard. If you had heart disease, you certainly would go to your doctor and figure out what you need to do, right? This is no different than that. And my hope is that as people begin to understand that this is not a terrible thing, being diagnosed with ADD, I've come to grips with the fact that it's really been helpful to me. I've actually been able to do the things that I never thought I would be able to do, mostly because I'm ADD.
It's amazing when we look at the environment our kids are growing up in compared to when we grew up. It's almost an attack against sleep, exercise, and diet.
It is.
The choices of foods have become terrible. We're more sedentary, spend more screen time, and we do it we sacrifice sleep, whether it's professionally to keep up with our jobs or just with kids playing games and doing other things in lieu of sleeping when they should. These are dangerous trends. They affect the health globally. It's a discussion universally. But when it comes to a child or a teen or even an adult not feeling right,
yes,
they've been building a life on certain habits. So when they can work with you, then they would have a chance to maybe get a little different viewpoint on what they're doing and find comfortable ways to make changes instead of looking at something dramatic like medication.
Right. So we talk in terms of positive psychology. We talk in terms of what can you do in terms of adding to your life or making small adjustments. And we look at things that have making small adjustments that have large impact on our lives. And that's what we do. We just encourage them. We're very supportive, and we try to look at it from as most positive possible way as we can.
Thank you so much for giving us an inside look at ADD, and thank you all for watching today. Check out our website, ahealthyiowa.org, and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.